I thought I was leaving a cheating wife, but what I found was far worse. My name is Ethan Thompson. I'm 35 years old, a middle manager at a tech company, and I live in a suburban area outside the city. It was just another hectic work week when everything changed. I had just finished a long conference call and was ready to head to bed when I got a call from my boss. He needed me in the office first thing in the morning, and since the office was a couple of hours away, I had no choice but to book a last-minute flight. I quickly packed my bags, told my wife, Lily, I'd be back tomorrow night, and rushed out the door. My kids, Jake and Emma, were already asleep at my parents' place for the weekend. I arrived at home late, exhausted, and ready to crash, but something felt off. The house was dark, save for a faint light coming from our bedroom. My first thought was that Lily might still be awake, but as I crept closer, I heard voices, hers and a man's. I froze. I knew immediately what it meant. I had suspected for a while that things weren't right between us, but hearing their conversation made the gut-wrenching truth undeniable. I was betrayed. My stomach twisted as I recognized the voice of her lover. I didn't know who he was, but I could tell from their tone that this wasn't the first time they had been together. I felt my blood run cold. My hands were shaking, but I had to stay calm. My grandfather always told me to keep my temper in check. Anger was never the solution, but I had to do something. I had to know the full truth. I rushed out to my car and grabbed my work-issued phone, setting it to record. I wasn't just going to confront her without proof. I needed evidence. With the camera rolling, I crept back inside, moving silently through the hall. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door to our bedroom, I could hear them more clearly. My wife, my Lily, was saying things that made my chest tighten. She was laughing, talking about how easy it was to sneak around while I was away. And then I heard him, her lover, talking about his plans to spend more time with her, how they could make it work. I couldn't take it anymore. With every word, I felt like I was suffocating. I had to act. I threw open the door and there they were, Lily in bed with another man. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut, but my anger rose faster. I stormed into the room, shouting at them both. The man scrambled to his feet, but I was faster. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. My voice was a low growl, barely containing the fury that surged inside me. "Get out," I snarled. "Now." Lily was in the corner, trembling. I couldn't even look at her. All I could do was focus on the man. I wasn't sure what happened next. I was blinded by rage. I shoved him out the door and slammed it behind him, turning to face her. She was shaking. Her eyes were wide with terror. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to control the storm inside me. The silence between us was thick with the weight of her betrayal. "Come here," I ordered, my voice shaking but firm. Lily hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. She knew what I was capable of when I lost control. I didn't care anymore. My world had been shattered in that moment, and I wanted answers. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. Please don't hurt me." Her voice was barely audible, but it only fueled the anger coursing through my veins. I stepped forward and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward me. "Sorry," I repeated bitterly. "You're sorry for what? For sleeping with another man in our bed? In our home? For betraying me and our children?" I could see her eyes widen with fear, and for a moment, I wondered how long this had been going on. How many others had there been before him? How many times had she lied to my face, pretending everything was fine? Sheila's voice cracked as she begged for my forgiveness. "Please, Ethan, I never meant to hurt you. I love you. I never wanted this." The words were meaningless. My mind was spinning, But one thing was crystal clear. I had to make her leave. There was no other way. My world had crumbled, and I couldn't live with her under the same roof anymore. "You're gone by noon tomorrow," I said coldly. "Take everything with you, this bed, all the furniture. Leave my things alone. Just go." She stared at me in disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend what was happening. "What do you mean, leave? Where will I go?" "Figure it out," I spat. "Maybe ask your brothers, the ones I've lent money to over the years. Get out, and don't ever come back." Lily whimpered, but I had no sympathy left for her. I grabbed my things, storming out of the room. I needed to leave. If I stayed, I was afraid I would do something I would regret. As I left the house, I could hear her sobbing in the background, but it didn't stop me. I drove to the nearest hospital to get checked out. My nose was bleeding, and I had a few bruises from the scuffle, but I didn't care. All that mattered was getting away from her. The police were called, but I lied to them. Said the other guy had attacked me and I couldn't remember what happened. The officers didn't ask many questions. I was a respected local employee, and one of the officers even worked at my company. It was easy to get away with it. I showed up to work the next day, my face still bruised. The last thing I wanted to do was sit at a desk, but I had to pretend everything was normal. And then I saw him, Steve, the guy who had been working as my assistant for the past year. He was younger than me, in his 20s, and he had the kind of confidence that made him impossible to ignore. But today, Steve looked different. He was bruised, his face swollen from what looked like a fight. I could tell he'd been through something, but I had no idea just how connected his pain was to mine. He was asleep on my office couch, and as I approached, I noticed the bruise on his nose and the cut on his lip. It didn't take long to figure out he'd been in the same kind of situation I had been. And that's when he looked up at me. "I guess we both had a rough night," he said with a wry smile. I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was Lily, her betrayal, her lies, and how my entire life had changed in a matter of hours. But I couldn't let it show. Not yet. Steve was still lying there, half awake, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. The sight of him, bruised and battered like me, felt oddly comforting. It was like a silent bond we shared, both of us dealing with the chaos in our lives. "You good?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just another morning, man," Steve replied, his voice rough. "I came home last night to a surprise, and I wasn't the one who ended up with a broken nose." I stiffened. My blood began to boil again. It felt like the anger inside me was just waiting to explode. I didn't need to ask what happened, but Steve wasn't hiding anything. He had no reason to. He sat up slowly and adjusted the brace on his nose. "Lily?" I muttered, my mind spiraling back to her and the man I'd thrown out of our home just hours before. Steve looked at me carefully, then shrugged. "That bad, huh?" "You could say that," I said, my voice low, too tight with emotion. "She's been cheating on me, Steve. I caught her last night, and I don't know what's worse, the betrayal or how long it's been going on." Steve's face softened, and he shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Man, I'm sorry, but you don't need to do this alone. You've got people who care. You've got me." His words hit me harder than I expected. Steve, the guy who always seemed to have his act together, was offering me a lifeline, and I didn't even know if I could take it. I had always thought of him as my assistant, my subordinate in the office, but now I saw him as a man who understood pain, who knew what it felt like to have his life ripped apart. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. There were things I needed to do, things that couldn't wait. I was so close to a breaking point, and I knew I had to keep it together. "I'm going to get a lawyer," I said firmly, trying to channel my rage into something productive. "I'm going for full custody of the kids." I can't let her just waltz back into our lives. Not after what she's done. Steve nodded, though his face showed signs of concern. That's a tough battle, man, but you have to do what's right for your kids. I didn't say anything else, but I knew he was right. The moment Lily had betrayed me, everything had changed. Not just for me, but for Jake and Emma. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to grow up in a home where trust was broken like that. I left the office early that day, trying to focus on the steps ahead. I was making calls, setting up meetings, and preparing myself for what would undoubtedly be the hardest fight of my life. But there was one thing I couldn't shake: the nagging feeling that there were more secrets buried beneath this mess. Secrets that I was only beginning to uncover. That night, after a long day of calls and appointments, I returned home. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kids were with my parents, and Lily was nowhere to be found. I walked through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing against the walls, and I couldn't help but feel like a stranger in my own home. I paused at the kitchen counter and stared at the unopened bottle of whiskey sitting there. My grandfather had always said that alcohol was a temporary escape, a way to numb the pain, but it only made things worse in the end. I didn't want to go down that road. I had too much at stake now. But even as I fought the urge to reach for the bottle, something caught my eye. A small stack of papers, Lily's things. She must have left them behind when she packed. I flipped through them absently, expecting to find bills or old receipts, but something stopped me cold. There, hidden between the papers, was a letter that wasn't for me. It was addressed to someone named Mark, the same man I'd thrown out of the house earlier. My blood ran cold as I skimmed through it. It was full of love declarations, promises of a future together. Lily had been planning this. She had been plotting her escape for weeks. And then it hit me, the extent of her betrayal. This wasn't just an affair. It was an entire life she had built behind my back. A life where I wasn't part of the picture. I felt my hands shake as I folded the letter and stuffed it into my pocket. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by staying here, stewing in silence. Grabbed my phone and texted Steve. "Meet me tonight. I need your help." Within minutes, Steve replied, "I'll be there." It didn't take long for Steve to show up. I had a bottle of whiskey out on the table, though I hadn't touched it yet. Steve took one look at it and raised an eyebrow. "Feeling like a drink, huh?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but this is bad, Steve. It's worse than I thought." I handed him the letter. "I found this in her stuff. She's been planning to leave me for months. She has this whole thing with Mark. It's not just a fling. It's a whole damn affair." Steve read the letter silently, his face growing more serious with each passing line. When he finished, he looked up at me, his eyes hard. "I'm sorry, man, but this doesn't change anything. You're doing the right thing. You're fighting for your kids, and that's what matters." I couldn't even look at him. Instead, I stared at the letter in my hand, my mind racing. The whole situation felt like a nightmare, but it was real, and now I was tangled in it. The letter burned in my palm like a brand. "I need to confront her," I said, my voice tight. "I need her to know what she's done." Steve gave me a sympathetic look. "Are you sure about this? This won't be pretty, man. You've got to be prepared for the fallout." "I don't care," I said firmly. "She needs to know I'm done. I need to take control of this. I've spent too long being the fool." Steve stayed quiet as I stood up and grabbed my keys. I wasn't going to let this go. Not without a fight. I drove back to the house, each mile feeling heavier than the last. When I pulled up, I could see the faint glow of light spilling from the windows. She was there. I could feel it. I marched up to the door, Steve following close behind me. I knocked 3 times, my heart pounding. It felt like everything in my life had led to this moment. Lily opened the door slowly, her eyes still red from earlier. She knew I was upset, but she didn't know the full extent of what I had discovered. "Ethan, please, can we talk?" she started, but I didn't let her finish. "Talk? You've been talking to him behind my back. You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" shouted, my voice raw. Lily recoiled, her face turning pale. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I don't want to hear it," I yelled. "You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed us. And now I'm done." I turned on my heel, ready to leave, but then I remembered something. The letter. The one thing that had been weighing on me more than anything else. I took it out of my pocket and shoved it in her hands. "You want to talk? Fine. But take a good look at what you've done. This is on you, Lily. All of it." She didn't say anything. She just stared at the letter, her face crumpling in horror. As I walked away, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. I had no idea what came next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this life any longer. I had to move on. For me, I didn't know what to expect when I left that night. The confrontation with Lily had gone as expected, emotionally charged, ugly, and filled with all the bitterness that had been building up over the years. But there was a sense of finality in the air. Something had snapped inside me, and I knew, without a doubt, that there was no going back. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my apartment, Steve's words still echoing in my mind. "You're doing the right thing." But was I? Was this really the right decision? I had so many questions, and yet there were no easy answers. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, and I was desperately trying to find my footing. The next morning, I woke up to an unsettling calm. The kids were still with my parents, and I didn't have to go into work. There was a strange relief in the silence, like the calm before a storm. I knew I had to take action, but I didn't know where to begin. Then came the phone call. It was Gator, the lawyer I'd hired. She was professional to the point, but there was something in her voice that told me this was no ordinary call. "You need to come in, Ethan," she said. "We've got a new development in your case. I don't want you to panic, but you need to hear this in person." I felt my stomach drop. Had been bracing myself for bad news, but nothing could prepare me for what was coming. I grabbed my jacket and headed to her office, my mind running wild with possibilities. When I walked in, Gator's expression was serious, almost too serious. "I'm afraid things just took a turn," she said, handing me a file. I opened it slowly, my heart racing in my chest. The first page was a police report, detailing a suspicious incident involving Lily and her brother. It was dated 2 days ago. My eyes widened as I read the details. Lily's brother had been caught trying to withdraw a large sum of money from a joint account. The bank flagged it, and the police had been involved. According to the report, he had forged my signature and tried to take funds that weren't his. But that wasn't all. The report mentioned something else, something far more disturbing. They had found traces of drugs in Lily's brother's car, as well as a large quantity of illegal substances in her apartment. It wasn't just a case of infidelity anymore. Lily had been involved in something far darker. "Ethan, this changes things," Gator said, watching me closely. "This could work in your favor, but it could also get messy. You need to decide how you want to handle this. If we play it right, you could get full custody of the kids, and we might be able to keep Lily away for good." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. It was about a betrayal that went far deeper than I could have ever imagined. It was about a family that had been torn apart by lies, manipulation, and now criminal activity. "I need time," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "I need to figure out what to do next." Gator nodded. "Take the time you need, but don't wait too long. The situation is escalating. We need to act fast." I left her office in a daze, my mind racing. The weight of everything that had happened was beginning to crush me. I needed to protect my children. I needed to protect myself. But how? I decided to go to the one place where I could think clearly, my parents' house. I needed to see Jake and Emma, to hold them, to remind myself why I was doing this. When I arrived, I found them playing in the living room with my mom. Their laughter was the sound of innocence, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my head. "Dad!" Jake shouted, running over to me. "You're home." I crouched down and pulled him into a tight hug. "Yeah, buddy, I'm home." Emma joined in, her small arms wrapping around me. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, but in that moment, with my kids in my arms, I felt like I could breathe again. "I'll never let anyone hurt you guys," I whispered to them. I spent the afternoon with them, trying to forget the nightmare waiting for me at home. But even in the midst of their laughter and play, my mind kept drifting back to Lily and to everything I had learned in the past 24 hours. I couldn't keep avoiding it. The reality was setting in. The fight for custody wasn't just about a cheating wife. It was about protecting my kids from a mother who had betrayed them, and me in the worst possible way. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down to have a serious conversation with my parents. I needed their support more than ever. "I'm thinking about going for full custody," I told them. "I don't want Lily around the kids anymore. Not after everything that's happened." My father was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying me carefully. "Son, you've got to do what's best for them. If she's involved in all this, I don't know if you can let her near them." My mother was quieter than usual, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She had always liked Lily, but she knew what it meant to protect family. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan," my mother said softly. "But don't let the anger cloud your judgment. You have to stay strong, for the kids, and for yourself." Their words were a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, but it didn't make it any easier. The next day, I contacted Gator again, asking her to move forward with the custody battle. I didn't care how long it took. I wasn't going to let Lily tear apart my family any longer. That afternoon, I went home to confront Lily once more. I didn't care about the details anymore. I didn't care about how it happened or why. All that mattered was that I was taking control of my life, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. When I walked into the house, I was surprised to find that she wasn't there. Her things were gone, but on the kitchen counter there was a note. "Ethan, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to tell you something. I've been hiding things from you for a long time. I wasn't just cheating. I've been involved in things that are far worse than you could ever imagine. I'm sorry, but I can't undo what I've done. I'm leaving, for good." The words stung, but at the same time they brought a strange sense of relief. This was it. It was over. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I grabbed the papers I had been preparing for the divorce, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the woman I once loved was gone. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with lawyers, decisions about the kids, and the slow unraveling of my life with Lily. But amidst all the chaos, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was no longer living in someone else's shadow. The weight of betrayal, though crushing, had freed me in ways I couldn't explain. It was like the universe had forced me into a corner, and I was finally fighting my way out. One afternoon, just as I was preparing to take Jake and Emma to the park, I received a call from Gator. Her voice, usually calm and composed, had an edge of urgency that sent a chill through me.